we have been repeatedly discussing optometry and access to optometric eye care. I have a letter that was sent to me today, and today I was proud to give a member statement about saving eye care in Ontario, but this letter arrived after I gave that, so I wanted to share this. It's from an optometrist, Dr. Seema Correa, who's a Durham Region optometrist, and she said, quote, "Optometrists are feeling so frustrated with this whole situation, especially since the government keeps saying, quote, we need optometrists to return to the table, when we have never left and have been trying to communicate with our local MPPs nonstop for over a year. Our patients are suffering and it's breaking our hearts. I'm in disbelief that almost 2 months into this, the government is willing to sit back and let people just not have access to essential eye care. Even if optometrists were not willing to negotiate, which is so far from the truth, we've been begging for a mechanism to negotiate for decades, the government's responsibility is to ensure that all Ontarians have access to health care. They are the government. Honestly, I'm not sure how things work in the Legislature, but if there's any way to point-blank ask the Minister of Health why, if she agrees that optometrists should not be paying out of pocket to see OHIP-insured patients, can she not sign a commitment to a legally binding negotiation process whereby optometrists do not have to pay out of pocket to provide OHIP-insured services? This simple action would end service withdrawal. With a commitment that is legally binding, optometrists would be able to trust that a resolution would be determined." As she said, their words without a commitment don't hold any weight with optometrists. Also, we just want someone to call out Minister of Health, the MPP from Eglinton Lawrence, and the Premier, and anyone else who tries to say that optometrists are not returning to the table, with a statement that acknowledges that optometrists are ready, willing, and able to negotiate, but mediation is not the only way that this can happen. Speaker, I'm glad to bring her voice to this Legislature, but I'm going to connect it to this bill that is about supporting people and businesses. We're seeing that constituents and potential patients of optometrists don't have access to what they need. But optometrists are also running their practices, and they have been saying that they can't afford to, that they're paying so much out of pocket to provide these services. They've been begging just to break even for years. And this government that says, hey, we're friends to business, they're letting that happen and have been for a long time. I wrote a letter to the minister. I'm awaiting a response. And I urged them to return to the negotiating table and restore OHIP-insured eye care services to all youth and seniors. People expect the government will resolve this. And we have all spoken about people with diabetes and on ODSP, seniors who can't get their driver's licenses in order to maintain their, or can't get appointments to have their eyes checked. Just such a mess that they're losing their independence as a result. Students in schools who are finding out as they're back this year who can't see the whiteboard properly. Oh well, they're out of luck.
The next question, the member for Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. Good morning. My question is for the Premier. And let's put some facts on the table. Independent third-party research shows that the operating cost to provide an eye exam in Ontario without doctor compensation is $75.51. In Manitoba, optometrists are reimbursed $77. In Quebec, $106. In Alberta, $137. But in Ontario, the government pays $44, forcing optometrists to lose $30 for each OHIP eye exam they provide. It's not fair, it's not sustainable, and children and seniors are paying the price of inaction. Speaker, the previous government failed to fix this issue. The current government must fix it so seniors and children get the eye care they deserve. Will the Premier commit today to saying yes to eye exams and paying the full operating cost of OHIP eye exams in this province?
And to reply, Minister of Health.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. I can certainly agree with you that the previous government did not address the concerns of optometrists. There's one reason why they are so concerned right now about reaching an agreement. Their last agreement expired in 2011. We have made payment into their account to cover that time period based at the same rate as a physician's rate of increase, which is what they asked for. We are ready, willing, and able to sit down at the table and discuss their additional costs, but some of the comparisons that they have provided to the public are not entirely accurate, particularly with respect to Manitoba, which makes payments every 2 years, not every year. So we're not comparing apples to apples in this situation. However, having said that, we are prepared, and we are continuing to fund OHIP-operated services, pay for services for children and seniors.
Response?
But we want to sit back at the table with the optometrists to discuss their additional costs, and I'll have more to say about that in the supplemental.
The supplementary question.
Speaker, with all due respect to the minister, this is about simple math, not magical math. The $39 million basically equals out to an extra dollar per the last decade, still meaning that optometrists are losing around $30 for each exam. The proposal the government has on the table increases compensation from around $44 to $48, meaning they're still losing $27 per exam. Like, what business can survive if they're losing money on every exam they offered? No other healthcare service is said, hey, you know what? To keep the lights on or to pay for staff or maybe to pay for the heating, you have to do that out of your pocket because we are not going to cover it. Speaker, it's just wrong. It is wrong, and it's letting down seniors and children who need access to critical eye care, which is health care. So will the government at least commit to covering the operating costs, not even compensating the doctors, covering the operating costs of eye exams in this province?
Minister of Health.
Once again, I appreciate the opportunity to correct another fundamental misapprehension. With respect to the $39 million that's being paid into the accounts of optometrists, it's not being paid pro rata to every single optometrist in the program. It's not another $1.50, whatever it is that is being suggested. It's actually a payment to cover them for the OHIP-funded services that they provided during that time period. Very significant difference. In fact, there are some optometrists that will be receiving over $100,000 as a result of just this one payment. However, we're not suggesting that that should be the only payment. We don't expect optometrists to pay out of pocket for the services that they provide. We are prepared to pay the $39 million in back payments, 8.48% going forward, retroactive to April 1st of this year.
Response?
And then to enter into an agreement with them to talk about their operating costs. We are willing to look at their overhead costs, but we can't just write a blank check. We have to do our...
Thank you. For Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Speaker. Every day, my office gets calls from seniors who are worried about losing their vision. They get calls from parents who are worried that yet another school year will be lost because their children can't see the blackboard. Eye care is a critical, life-changing part of our healthcare system that has material impacts on opportunity and the quality of life. I myself have a complex eye condition called keratoconus. It was an optometrist who recognized the condition and got me the help I needed to keep my vision. I was lucky. Imagine how many are not, because this government embraces inaction. Children missing critical eye tests that can identify problems early and help them see for life. Optometrist services continue to be unavailable because the government refuses to negotiate a new agreement with them. Optometrists are healthcare professionals. They are small business owners, and they are forced to cover nearly half of the costs of a visit. Even with the newest offer, optometrists would still be getting less than those in BC and Alberta. If I sound like a broken record, it's because we've heard this again and again. Petitions introduced, questions to the government, member statements for years, and still the same problem persists. For a government that likes to tell the people they're in the habit of saying yes, I say this: you can't say yes if you don't even come to the table. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Toronto St. Paul's. Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. The optometry job action has entered its 3rd month, and children, seniors, and people with complex eye care needs in Toronto St. Paul's, my community, and across Ontario are suffering. I heard from a constituent whose child desperately needs a new prescription. Without it, she's suffering migraines, dizziness, and comes home crying each day. At this point, she's willing to pay out of pocket for an appointment, but that's not an option here. This has left many with the last resort of leaving the province to receive this vital service. This is no longer solely a healthcare issue, it's an economic one, as people leave the province moving their money into other jurisdictions to boost their recovery without other options. My question is to the Premier. For a government that claims to speak dollars and cents, is this enough now for you to get a fair deal in the hands of optometrists and get them caring for their patients in need, as we know they want to in Ontario? Thank you.
I recognize the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member from St. Paul's for the question. As I mentioned before, I myself suffer from migraines, and I think it's terrible that this young lady is suffering from migraines, and she should have an appointment. So I encourage her and her mother to reach out to the College of Optometrists. There are optometrists providing services in Ontario, and it is frankly a professional obligation of all optometrists to ensure that their patients do not suffer any harm or any deterioration in their condition or suffer at all, frankly. As I've said before, we're extremely disappointed that the optometrists have done this, have walked away from the negotiations. It's very difficult to negotiate if nobody is there at the table. They chose the mediator, they refused to meet the mediator's conditions, and they will not come back to the table. We have done everything possible to lay the groundwork for a deal with the optometrists. We have put upfront payment of $39 million. We've offered 8.4% increase. We've offered ongoing negotiations. We are ready, willing, and able to negotiate with the optometrists. I encourage them all to come back to the table now.
Thank you. I return to the member from Toronto St. Paul's for a supplementary.
Speaker, the government has known about these negotiations for over a year and decided to do nothing. Let's just put that on the table first. My question is back to the Premier. The government has said over and over that it is optometrists who are not coming to the table. Doug Darabi, the Senior Director of Government Relations with the Ontario Association of Optometrists, has confirmed that he has not heard from this Conservative government since August 29th, almost 2 months ago. This was after the government presented a deal that could only be described as a joke after years of negotiating with this government and, quite frankly, the previous Liberals. A day of meetings through mediators and lawyers costs each side approximately $15,000. While this government may be comfortable spending taxpayer money on poor, unfair negotiations, the OAO does not have these means. My question is to the Premier. When can the Ontario Association of Optometrists expect a fair, realistic deal that will get them back to their patients they so desperately want to see here in Ontario?
Thank you. To the Assistant to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the member from St. Paul's for the question. Of course, the mediator left the parties with a standing invitation to resume mediation at any time. All we're waiting for is for them to come back to the table. The ministry has accepted the mediator's conditions. The ministry has communicated its continued willingness to return to mediation, and the ministry is ready, willing and able to do just that. That's what we're there for. Since day one, we've done nothing but try to get to an agreement with the optometrists, but they're using hardball tactics, frankly, using vulnerable patients as part of their negotiating strategy. I would encourage them to come back to the table. We are prepared to do everything possible
through the chair,
deal,
please,
including review the overhead costs, which they say are an issue, but we need to see the material. So we need to get them back to the table. That's where a deal will be made.
Thank you.
Member from London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Speaker. Today I want to bring up a very important issue in my riding, and there's so many, but this one is really bubbling. It's eye care. And by the Ford government not fully dealing with the eye care funding issue, it's been over a month since optometrists across the province have had to stop providing routine eye exams, which means it's been over a month since my constituents have had access to necessary health care services. And Speaker, do you know who's paying the price for that? It's our most vulnerable. It's our seniors and it's our children. And they're being put in the middle of this issue. And they've been writing me. A senior has contacted my office and many others, and she said after her appointment was cancelled last month, her husband and her are over 75 years old and they live with glaucoma. Having eye pressure checked regularly, along with field tests that have measures to manage this condition, it would keep them from worsening the glaucoma, and which means if it's not treated, they can actually go blind. That's how important it is. Another one wrote me, a parent wrote and said, my 6-year-old son says he can't see the board and he complains every night. His eyes hurt. How am I supposed to help him if I can't get an eye exam? Speaker, people with underlying health conditions. A woman wrote saying that she's in a wheelchair and has a very rare disease and she really depends on her sight for transitioning. I'm trying to stay home without going to government-paid facilities. Yes, this funding shortfall started with the Liberal government, but it could end with the Conservative government. Optometrists in the province shouldn't have to pay out of their pockets to deliver OHIP coverage to their patients. This government needs to go back to the table in good faith and talk to the optometrists and resolve this issue and stop putting seniors and kids in the middle of this political issue.
But my question now is about the 35 days that it's been now since seniors and kids in our province have been able to access eye care. There are children who are literally now in school having trouble seeing the blackboard. There are seniors who are unable to renew their driver's license, which then, of course, makes them less mobile, less independent, because they can't get their glasses prescription renewed because the service isn't being funded by the government. I spoke to a mom, her name Beverly Murray, last week, whose teenage daughter is literally suffering from eye pain and migraines, and she cannot get her daughter an appointment to have her vision and her eyes looked after by their optometrist. So my question to the Premier is, why is he saying no? Why is he saying no and refusing to get us a fair deal and fund the optometry services that our kids and our seniors so desperately need and deserve?
Deputy Premier and Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And through you, Speaker, I would like to advise the Leader of the Official Opposition that OHIP-funded services continue to be funded by the Province of Ontario. However, the many optometrists in the province, at the urging of the association, have chosen not to provide those services. We're very disappointed with that. We have been engaging in discussions with them, and we're ready to continue those discussions. But the problem is due to the fact that the Ontario Association of Optometrists refuses to go back to the independent mediator and adhere to their conditions in order for the mediation to resume. We are ready, willing, and able to go back to the table to discuss, but this is not something that the OAO is interested in doing, and it's especially concerning that they continue to tell the public that they are waiting for us to return to the mediation table, when in fact that is not the case. We, as the government, are ready to go back and resume those discussions, but the Ontario Association of Optometrists is not.
The supplementary question.
Well, Speaker, I have to say that it's really interesting to see what's happened here in Ontario. First thing that happened was the Liberals delisting eye care services, allowing, of course, seniors and kids, but then seriously underfunding those services for many, many, many years. And now this Premier is making it much, much worse by refusing to come to the table and negotiate a fair deal, and refusing to properly fund eye care. Granted, the Liberals refused to do it for years and years as well, but the problem has become worse under this government, and that is no way, Speaker, to govern. That is no way to govern. This government needs to get serious about cutting a deal that is fair. And my question to the Premier is, why does he continue to say yes to his buddies, to his developer buddies, to the big box stores, but say no when it comes to providing the necessary eye and vision care for our kids and our seniors?
Minister of Health.
Speaker. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to set the members of the opposition to understand what the situation actually is, as well as the members of the public, because the situation is such that the optometrists have refused to come back to mediation. They're choosing to demand an outcome before we even get into negotiations. However, I also appreciate the chance to advise what has actually happened. The government is making a payment of $39 million into the accounts of optometrists who have provided those services, covering an account to cover what's happened in the past, and I totally agree that the optometrists were not treated fairly by the previous government, but we are paying the $39 million, recognizing at the same rate as what physicians would have received from 2011 to when their jail expired to now what physicians would have received. That's how we calculated that $39 million. We've also offered to an immediate OHIP fee increase of 8.48%, retroactive to April 1st, 2021, and to engage in further negotiations with the optometrists about their overhead costs, because we have a responsibility to do that as we attempt to achieve a...
Thank you. And the final supplementary.
The government has a duty and a responsibility to negotiate, not dictate. They haven't figured that out yet, but that's their responsibility. This Premier is easily saying yes to his buddies, but he said no to students, teachers and parents last spring. He said no last summer to long-term care residents and their families who needed the government's help. And now we're seeing it again, as he says no to our kids and our seniors who need to have vision care and deserve to have vision care here in our province. So my question to the Premier is, will he finally say yes, get back to the table and put proper funding in place and commit to negotiating a fair deal so that our kids and our seniors can get what they need in terms of their vision care?
I'll ask the members to take their seats. Minister of Health.
Thank you. Well, the short answer to your question is yes, we are ready, willing and able to go back into mediation, but you can't negotiate when you're the only party at the table. We have said that we are ready to proceed with the optometrists. We're ready to proceed to rectify their very relevant concerns, to deal with the back pay issue, to deal with an increase going forward, to deal with their overhead, and to have an ongoing monthly discussion with them, which is something that is not done with every healthcare group. We want to remedy their complaints. We want to reach a deal with them, but they need to come back to the table. We are ready to go to the table. We have agreed to the mediator's request, but the Ontario Association of Optometrists has not. They're not our conditions. They're the mediator's conditions. We're asking them to please come back to the table so we actually can negotiate. But you can't do that by yourself.
The next question.
Speaker, my office has received thousands of phone calls, emails and letters from concerned seniors, parents and social assistance recipients that are not receiving the eye care they desperately need. Parents are worried that their children cannot participate fully in class because they can't see the board at the front of the classroom. Seniors have been forced to visit our emergency rooms to seek the vision care they desperately need. Eye care is critical health care, and it is important that all Ontarians have access to an optometrist when they need one. I received an email from a concerned father whose 19-year-old daughter has been unable to book an appointment with her optometrist. Her vision has deteriorated so badly she can no longer drive herself to work or to buy groceries. I have also heard from a constituent that requires a yearly eye exam as he is diabetic. He says that his vision is now in jeopardy as he waits to see his doctor and have his prescription updated. No one should have to go without health care in this province, and that includes vision care. Optometrists and their patients suffer from decades of chronic cuts to vision care. Optometrists have been forced to cover almost half of the cost of an appointment out of pocket because this government and the previous Liberal government have refused to properly fund OHIP-covered eye care. Last week, Windsor City Council sent a letter to the Minister of Health calling on her and the Conservative government to get back to the table and negotiate a fair agreement with the Association of Optometrists. I echo the call of Windsor City Council and the thousands of individuals in my riding that contacted me about this important issue. It's time for this government to say yes to eye care for all Ontarians and negotiate in good faith with optometrists in order to protect the vision of everyone in the
The member for Hamilton North.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. It has been months since the Ontario optometrists have heard from the Minister, although she has no doubt received hundreds of messages from patients and professionals. And just in case she's missed some, I'm going to send some over with the pages. I've had constituents call my office demanding answers of when their children will be able to get an eye exam, as their kids are struggling in the schools. There are seniors who can't leave their homes because they can't get an eye exam that is required for the 80-plus driver's test. Speaker, it's not fair that people's lives are being negatively impacted by this government's inaction. When will the government reach out to Ontario optometrists about getting back to the negotiating table so that children and seniors can get the eye care that they need?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And well, there's one thing that I can agree with the member on with respect to her question, and that is it is very disappointing that the Ontario Association of Optometrists has decided to withdraw publicly provided services for children and seniors. That is done at their urging. The government continues to fund these OHIP-covered services for children and seniors. However, this is a decision that's been made by the Ontario Association of Optometrists. We have made payments to them already. We've already made a $39 million payment into their accounts to indicate that we want to work with them. We want for them to come back to the table. This is to cover some of the losses they've had in the last 10 years since their agreement expired in 2011. Nothing was done about it by the previous government, but we want to sit down with the Ontario Association of Optometrists and find a result to this issue that's been going on for some years.
Supplementary question.
Ontarians need eye exams, and they need them now. There is no legal mandate for the government to negotiate with the optometrists, so it's not surprising that the government has used this to their advantage to ignore the optometrists' demands. The government's proposal of a one-time catch-up payment would only be 8.48% increase, which would only cover approximately $48 of the $75 exam. This would leave Ontario behind every province in the country. Just to catch up to the lowest funded province next, which is Manitoba, there would need to be a 65% increase to funding in Ontario. So, will the government commit to negotiating with optometrists in good faith, or are they just going to leave optometrists and their patients in a state of limbo forever?
Minister of Health.
Thank you. Well, first, I think it's important to correct some of the misconceptions contained in this statement made by the member. First is the comparisons have been made with respect to comparisons with other provinces. That is not an apples-to-apples comparison. In fact, the payments in Manitoba are made every other year, not every year. Secondly, we have already
To withdraw the unparliamentary remark and conclude her answer.
Speaker. In addition, we have already indicated that we want to sit down, go back to mediation with the Ontario Association of Optometrists. We've already offered a payment with respect to past payments that they have not received since 2011. We want to continue with an 8.48% increase, at this point now retroactive actually to April 1st, and we want to discuss the overhead issues they've told us and told many of you are really important to them. We are prepared to sit down at mediation and continue these discussions with the association, but they are not willing to come back. So that you can't negotiate by yourself. We ask.
Thank you. Member statements. The member for Oshawa.
Thank you, Speaker. People care about their health, and they clearly understand the importance of optometric eye care and are not willing to allow this government to play games with people's sight and eye health. My office is hearing from folks on ODSP like Arnaldo, who says, quote, "I'm diabetic. I need my eyes checked every year. I got to get it every year. I'm due for my glasses. I missed a year because of the pandemic, so what are we going to do about that? Seniors and diabetics and young people need glasses. The $39 million is a slap in the face. I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place," end quote. We're hearing from parents like Leanna, who wrote, quote, "I'm writing to you today as a parent of 2 daughters in Oshawa, one who currently wears glasses and contact lenses, and one who this week has mentioned to me that she's having a difficult time reading the whiteboard at school. I have done what any parent would do in this case. I phoned my optometrist to make an appointment. My eldest needs new contact lenses, and my youngest likely now needs corrective lenses. To my horror, I learned that Not only is OHIP not covering our exams, but I can't even choose to pay to have my daughter's vision checked. I'm left with one daughter who now cannot get contact lenses because her prescription is more than a year old, and another who can't effectively learn because she is unable to see properly, and no options to resolve this for my kids." End quote. Speaker, I've written to this Minister of Health about the many calls and letters from Oshawa seniors, folks and families who cannot access the eye care they deserve. I will continue to present petitions and advocate for this government to return to the negotiating table and restore OHIP-insured eye care services to all youth and seniors. Despite the challenges for many to accessing eye care in Ontario, everyone can see plainly that the government's unwilling to fairly fund optometric eye care. So do the right thing, Premier, and save eye care in Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question, the member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Premier. We're now entering the third month without access to eye care for seniors and children. Many of my constituents in Parkdale High Park cannot access desperately needed eye care, like Stefan's 13-year-old child who can't read the blackboard at school, and Dan's 9-year-old stepchild who can't read anything either and is falling behind. Parents like Stefan and Dan want to know, how many pennies does the Premier need to pinch before he will prioritize their children's vision and academic success?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. I understand the concern of many parents that are concerned about their child's eye care, as well as many seniors that are worried about any vision problems they have that are not being dealt with. However, the decision to step away from the table was done by the Ontario Association of Optometrists, not by the
Opposition,
government.
come to order.
The Government of Ontario will continue to fund OHIP services, eye care services for both children and seniors, and we are ready to go back to the table to discuss this with the optometrists. We've already made a payment of $39 million into their accounts to cover past losses because, as the member will know, their agreement expired in 2011 and nothing was done by the previous Liberal government to remedy that. We are prepared to do that. We understand that optometrists have issues to discuss, but we need them to come back to the table. We are prepared to go back into mediation, and we really hope that the optometrists will do the same so we can.
Thank you. Member for Hamilton Mountain, come to order. Supplementary question.
Back to the Minister. Another constituent of mine, Jean, was recently diagnosed with glaucoma. Without access to regular appointments with his optometrist, Jean's vision will be permanently damaged, and he may lose his vision altogether. Speaker, Jean's vision is worth funding. Eye care is health care, and yet this government is sitting idle while children and seniors go without care. Will the minister do her job and negotiate a fair deal with the optometrists?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I certainly agree with the member that eye care is an essential service. It is something that needs to be funded, and the optometrists have a duty to continue to provide care. If they choose to not provide care to certain people, they still have a responsibility that the College of Optometrists has indicated they must deal with, and we are ready to sit down to the table with them. In addition to the $39 million payment that we've already made, we've also offered to increase their services by 8.48%, retroactive to April 1st, and immediately establish a working committee to deal with the overhead issues that optometrists have also mentioned. We want to reach a deal with them that is fair to them and is fair to the taxpayers of Ontario, but we can't do it alone. The government can't do it alone. We need the optometrists to come back to the table. That's the only way we can reach a deal. We are ready, willing, and able to come back to the table, and we ask the optometrists to please do the same.
Order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Pierce Family Eye Care. They have a sign outside their office saying "Fight for Sight," and they collected these signatures for me. To the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, whereas the Ontario government has underfunded optometry eye care for 30 years, and whereas the government only pays on average $44.65 for an OHIP-insured visit, the lowest rate in Canada, and whereas optometrists are being forced to pay substantially out of their own pocket to provide over 4 million services each year to Ontarians under OHIP, and whereas optometrists have never been given a formal negotiation process with this government, and whereas the government's continued neglect resulted in 96% of Ontario's optometrists voting to withdraw OHIP services beginning September 1st, 2021, We, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario as follows: to instruct the Ontario government to immediately commit to legally binding formal negotiations to ensure any future OHIP-insured optometry services are at a minimum funded at the cost of delivery. It's my pleasure to affix my signature to this petition and give it to Paige Emily. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Next question, the member for London North Centre.
My question is to the Premier. Speaker, the loss of OHIP-insured eye exams is a huge blow to families in London and across the province. Despite months of notice, the government stopped negotiating with optometrists, and kids, seniors, and persons with disabilities are starting to miss their eye exams. They are not receiving their health care. A London mom, Jessica, told me how increased screen time during the pandemic has hurt her children's eyes. She told me that her oldest daughter has been complaining about her eyes since the amount of screen time drastically increased last year with online schooling. She is now struggling on a daily basis. It's affecting her ability to learn. Karen is another London mom who reached out to me to let me know her daughter was experiencing difficulty seeing the board. She wrote to me saying, "Imagine my surprise when I called our optometrist and was told that I was unable to book an eye exam." Kids have had their learning disrupted for the past 2 school years, and now the lack of eye care is making this new school year even harder for them. Why isn't the minister putting the proper funding in place to make sure kids get the eye care they need and deserve?
The parliamentary assistant, member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Speaker. Thank you to the member opposite for this important question. We're extremely disappointed that at the urging of the Ontario Optometrists Association, some optometrists have chosen to withhold publicly funded services for our youth and seniors. And it's really due to the fact that the OAO continues to decline an independent third-party mediator's invitation to come back to the table and the conditions that have to be met for negotiations to resume. It's really concerning because they continue to tell the public, and the member opposite seems to have adopted this, that they are at the table, when in fact they are not. And the current impasse lies squarely at the feet of the OAO, which instead of participating in these good faith negotiations is choosing to demand an outcome before allowing negotiations to start. The government has made a reasonable and fair offer, and it's the beginning of future negotiations, and we would just like the OAO to come back to the table so that people such as the ones that you have mentioned in your question can get the eye care services that they should get. Thank you.
Supplementary question.
Back to the Premier. You know, the member's disappointment and concerns should be about the underfunding on your watch. Speaker, optometrists and London families are ready for OHIP-funded eye care services, but this government keeps telling them no. That's concerning for Londoners like Dennis, who rely on annual eye appointments to do his job. Dennis is a senior in my riding who works as a crossing guard near his local school. Eye exams are a regular part of his job to ensure kids can get to school safely. But his appointment this year was postponed because this government refuses to negotiate with optometrists. Unless this issue is resolved by November, Dennis risks not being able to do his job. I also think of persons with disabilities such as diabetes, like my constituent Mandy, who wrote to me, "I am unable to book or receive care from my optician due to the current government's unrealistic determination of fair pay to opticians. I will go blind and become a drain on the government if this does not get rectified as soon as possible."
Question.
Speaker, when is this government going to stop saying no and make sure seniors like Dennis and people like Mandy can access the care they need to go about their daily lives?
Again, the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Health to respond.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite. Obviously, this is a very important issue, and anyone who has been denied an appointment, who needs to have an appointment, and has any harm or suffering as a result of any delay, should reach out to the College of Optometrists. Optometrists have professional obligations to fulfill, and if they don't do so, the College of Optometrists will help direct people to another provider. I'll just say our government has made a fair and reasonable offer, an immediate compensation increase of 8.48% retroactive to April 1st, which is a catch-up fee of increases physicians got, a one-time payment of $39 million to catch up for increases that they didn't have for the last decade under a former government, future fee increases aligned with physician fee increases, as well as a commitment to immediately establish a working group to look at the overhead costs they seem to want us to look at, and we're happy to do that. Finally, a commitment for ongoing monthly discussions through an Optometry Services Review Committee. We are at the table, ready, willing and able. They need to come to the table so that we can negotiate a fair and reasonable agreement, which all Ontarians want.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to read a petition entitled Petition to Save Eye Care in Ontario, and I would like to thank Dr. Tyler Brown and the folks at the Ancaster Eye Clinic for providing just a few of these many petitions that we've received in my office. The petition to save eye care in Ontario to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. Whereas the Ontario government has underfunded optometric eye care for 30 years, and whereas the government only pays on average $44.65 for an OHIP-insured visit, the lowest rate in Canada, and whereas optometrists are being forced to pay substantially out of their own pocket to provide over 4 million services each year to Ontarians under OHIP, and whereas optometrists have never been given a formal negotiation process with the government, and whereas the government's continued neglect resulted in 96% of Ontario optometrists voting to withdraw OHIP services beginning September 1st, 2021, we, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario as follows: to instruct the Ontario government to immediately commit to legally binding formal negotiations to ensure any future OHIP-insured optometry services are, at a minimum, funded at the cost of delivery. I entirely support this petition, Mr. Speaker. I will put my name, affix my name to it, and have it sent down to the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question, the member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. My office has been flooded with emails and calls from constituents who are angry that they're being denied access to essential vision care. Yesterday, I heard from Jennifer, who's an Indigenous parent in my riding. Jennifer's 14-year-old daughter, Autumn, has had headaches and burning eyes for almost 2 months now. Jennifer is concerned that her daughter has developed an eye issue, but when she called her local optometrist to make an appointment, she was shocked to learn that no one under the age of 20 or over the age of 65 is able to visit an optometrist here in Ontario right now. She was told that if Autumn needed eye care, that the only option would be to take her to the emergency room. Jennifer wants to know why her daughter has to suffer because this government is refusing to negotiate a fair deal with optometrists.
Reply. The member for Eglinton Lawrence from Parliament District.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. I feel very much for Jennifer and her daughter, Autumn, and I can tell you that we're certainly extremely disappointed that at the urging of the Ontario Optometrists Association, optometrists have chosen to withhold publicly funded services from children and seniors. It's due to the fact that the OAO has selected a mediator, refused to meet the mediator's conditions, and has refused to come back to the table for negotiations, although there is a standing invitation to do so. It's especially concerning because optometrists keep telling members of the public that they are ready to negotiate, but they do not come back to the table. The current impasse lies squarely at the feet of the Ontario Optometrists Association, and we are more than anxious to get them to come back to the table to negotiate a fair deal. We've put an offer on the table. We've made an upfront good faith payment of $39 million, and we're really hoping that they will come back so we can make sure that residents get the care that they deserve.
Supplementary question.
Thank you, Speaker. Calls to my office from people unable to make an appointment with their optometrist are becoming more desperate. It has now been almost 2 months since seniors and kids in our province have been unable to access necessary vision care. The previous Liberal government badly underfunded vision care for kids and seniors, letting this problem spiral out of control, but now this government is refusing to pay for a fair plan with optometrists. They simply don't want to spend the money to ensure that children and seniors in this province have access to essential vision care. When will this government get back to the table and negotiate in good faith with the optometrists?
Member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the member opposite. We are at the table, ready, willing, and able to negotiate every day. There is a standing invitation, as I said, from the mediator who was chosen by the Ontario Optometrists Association, and we are all ready to negotiate any time they will come back to the table. So we encourage everybody out there to encourage optometrists to come back to the table. That is the place that a deal will happen. But I can tell you that this government is acting in good faith. We've already put a fair and reasonable offer on the table, including an immediate compensation increase of 8.48% retroactive to April 1st to catch up increases that physicians had over the last 10 years or so since optometrists last had an agreement. Also, a one-time payment of $39 million, which has already gone into the accounts of optometrists, again to catch up. future fee increases to align with physician increases, and also an immediate working group to go over their other concerns and continue to negotiate. We are ready, willing, and able. We hope they will come back to the table immediately so that people like Jennifer and Otta can get the care that they deserve.
Petitions. Member for Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I have a petition here to save eye care in Ontario to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. Whereas the Ontario government has underfunded optometric eye care for 30 years, and whereas the government only covers an average of 55% of the cost of an OHIP-insured visit, the lowest rate in Canada, and whereas optometrists must absorb the other 45% for the over 4 million services delivered annually under OHIP, and whereas optometrists have never been given a formal negotiation process with the government, and whereas the government's continued neglect resulted in 96% of Ontario optometrists voting to withdraw OHIP services beginning September 1st, 2021, we, the undersigned, petition the Legislative Assembly of Ontario as follows: to instruct the Ontario government to immediately commit to legally binding formal negotiations to ensure any future OHIP-insured optometry services are, at a minimum, funded at the cost of delivery. I support this. We'll affix my signature and we'll send it with a page. Thank you.
Petitions. The next question, the member for Ottawa, Orleans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, John in Orleans is in his 60s and he has cataracts. John relies on his optometrist to closely monitor this critical aspect of his health, and he's very concerned about his long-term eye health without regular examinations. And John isn't alone. Like I think everyone in this chamber, I've heard from thousands of constituents who support world-class OHIP-covered eye care and are frustrated with the government's inaction to ensure its continued delivery. I've heard from moms like Andrea, who, like many parents, have risen to the challenge this year, juggling work, kids at home, maintaining a household, and keeping their family safe. And now that their kids are headed back to school, they can't get an eye test. She wants to ensure that her children are able to see the smartboard and participate in extracurriculars they've been missing due to COVID. But due to the government's inaction, OHIP-covered eye exams have been non-existent for about a month, basically since school came back, Mr. Speaker. And like so many other issues facing the government, they wait until the absolute last moment, until they've broken the system and chaos has ensued, before they start to try to address the problem. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Premier. When will the government take action on eye care? Now that they've broken it, when will they start to try to fix it?
Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. In fact, I know that people like John and Andrea and thousands of people across the province are relying upon their optometrists to provide them with the care that they need, whether it's glasses for school or people with cataracts, seniors that have other eye care problems. That is why we are very disappointed that the OAO has walked away from the mediation table. We are ready, willing, and able to correct some of the problems that they have been experiencing pursuant to the previous government. Their last agreement expired in 2011. I know that they are frustrated. We want to work with them. We want to bring them back to the table. But to date, they've refused to agree to the conditions that have been put in place by the independent mediator, not by the government. We have agreed to those conditions. The optometrists have not. So we are very anxious to resume those discussions, but as I indicated earlier, you can't negotiate when there's only one party at the table. So I urge the optometrists to come back to the table. We are anxious to resolve your issues. We have put $39 million into your accounts that will be paid mid-October, but optometrists have already received the statements as to what they'll be receiving. We urge them to come back to the table so we can reach an agreement that is satisfactory to both the optometrists and to the taxpayers of Ontario, because we have a financial responsibility there as well. But we are ready to discuss their concerns any.
Thank you very much. And the supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary is for the Premier. For months, optometrists were trying to engage the government in meaningful discussions to address the eye care funding issues in the province, and the government simply said no. The government and this Premier like to say no, Mr. Speaker. The Premier said no to supporting workers with paid sick days. The Premier said no to vaccine certificates. The Premier said no to smaller class sizes. And now the Premier is saying no to OHIP-covered eye exams. Shireen in Orleans is a mother of 4. Her kids need eye exams so that they can go back to school and see the board, but they're also suffering from headaches, and this eye exam is a critical aspect in diagnosing that particular problem. She's tried to book an OHIP-covered eye exam for her kids, and she was told no, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when will the Premier actually start saying yes? When will he say yes to OHIP-covered eye exams and sit down and hammer out a deal to give Ontarians world-class eye care once again?
Minister of Health.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to, through you, Mr. Speaker, correct another fundamental misapprehension here. The government is still funding OHIP-covered eye services. However, the optometrists have chosen not to provide them. So the reason for this impasse lays at the feet of the optometrists at this point. They need to come back to the table to discuss this with us. We had a number of discussions 4 months before September 1st, which was the date that they decided that they would refuse to supply these services. Those we had several mediation efforts, which came to a delay or just to a standstill, because the optometrists wanted us to agree to a foregone conclusion. We can't agree in advance to something that has to be negotiated. So we are ready, willing, and able to discuss this with them. We've said that for months and months. We want to come to a conclusion with them to deal with their past issues, their present issues, and their future issues. So I would urge all of the members of the opposition to please discuss this with the Association of Optometrists. Ask them to come back to the table. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next question, the member for St. Catharines.
Thank you, Speaker. 1 out of every 5 people in Niagara are over the 65 years of age. COVID-19 has been hardest on our older adults population over the age of 65, which is something we could not control. And yet today I stand in this chamber to point out an issue affecting residents over the age of 65, and it is something we can control. It's about OHIP support for eye care and eye tests. This is because eye care is health care, and by ignoring this point hurts every senior in Ontario, especially senior communities like ours in Niagara. Mr. Premier, it is shameful you have not sat down to negotiate eye care, and seniors over the age of 65 are paying the price. Ontario pays the lowest rate for eye care in the country. Yes, this funding shortfall started with the Liberal government. However, it could end with the Conservative government. You could do the right thing today. Every day my office gets calls from seniors who are worried about losing their vision and being turned away because the Premier wants to save a buck. Well, Speaker, do you know who is paying the price for that? Yes, it's our seniors. I have made a commitment to my constituents to continue to pressure this government to do the right thing. That's what I will continue to do. So today, I stand to deliver a letter imploring you to sit down and negotiate eye care so our seniors can get the care they do deserve.
Thank you. For Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to the Minister of Health. Families in my riding across the province no longer have access to OHIP-insured eye exams. Despite months of advance notice, this government is absent from negotiations and refusing to bargain in good faith, leaving the eye care of Ontario families in the lurch. I heard from Laurel in Welland. In September, her 1-year-old son was stung by a bee. His eye was swollen, and their pediatrician said he needed an eye exam to determine if he had vision impairment. Because of this government's inaction, her son still has not been able to see an optometrist. Laurel emailed me asking why her baby is, quote, collateral damage in a dispute between devalued professionals and this government's misuse of taxpayer funds. Will the minister make a commitment today to get back to the table and adequately fund eye care so that families like Laurel's receive the care they deserve?
Minister of Health.
Speaker, and thank you very much to the member for the question. I know this is an important issue for many Ontarians right now. We greatly value the work that is done by our optometrists in providing quality eye care services to children, youth, adults, and seniors, and that any withdrawal of services has been by choice by optometrists, not by the government. We continue to fund OHIP services for children and seniors. We always will. We are ready to return to the mediation table. We have signaled that and said that publicly. We agreed to the conditions that were set by the mediator, who was actually chosen by the optometrists, not by the government. We agreed to their conditions to go back to the mediation table. However, the optometrists have chosen not to do so. So if you have any influence on them, I would encourage you to ask them to come back to the table, because we want to address their issues. We want to provide a resolution to their concerns.
Order. And the supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. It's the minister's job to do her job, not mine. This government is ignoring both taxpayers and healthcare professionals. I have seniors called me worrying that they cannot receive eye exams after crucial eye surgeries, putting their recovery under threat. We've heard from diabetics gravely concerned they're going to lose their eyesight. Eye care is health care. Presently in Ontario, no one under 20 or over 65 can receive an eye exam. Optometrists have been telling the government for months they would be forced to withdraw service if the government continued to pay only 55% of the cost of the OHIP-insured visits, the lowest rate in the entire country. The Ontario Association of Optometrists have indicated that they have not heard from the government since early September. In May, I brought this issue to the Legislature. We're now in October. Speaker, will this government get back to the table with optometrists and put proper funding in place to ensure that children and seniors receive the eye care they need?
Mr. Pell.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, I will certainly reiterate that we are ready. The government is ready to go back to the mediation table. However, the Ontario Association of Optometrists is not. And so that any decision to withdraw OHIP services is being done by the optometrists, not by the government. We will continue to pay for those services, and we have also offered a resolution to this concern. We are already going to pay $39 million into their accounts. The optometrists will see the amount that they will be receiving today. They will be receiving this amount in mid-October. This is to compensate them for, as they requested, the same rate of increase that physicians would have received between 2011, when their agreement expired, to the present. We have also proposed a resolution going forward of an increase of 8.48%, plus we've indicated to the optometrists that we want to discuss their overhead concerns to make sure that we can come to a resolution that is fair for optometrists, but also fair to the taxpayers of Ontario. We want to also establish a special working relationship with them, whereby we will meet monthly with them. We do not do that for every group, but we know that optometrists were not fairly dealt with by the previous government. We want to rectify that situation and provide a resolution of their concerns, and we're ready while it is.
The member for Humber River Black Creek.
Thank you, Speaker. This Conservative government has kept up the Liberal tradition of ignoring eye care here in Ontario, and on September 1st, 2021, the situation reached a breaking point. Now it has been almost 2 months that OHIP-covered patients are unable to receive eye care services. We're talking about children and youth up to age 19, seniors age 65 and up, and individuals with specific eye conditions and diabetes. People across our province have been reaching out desperately to get the eye care they need. In my community, I've heard from Neil, a senior with type 2 diabetes who needs regular checkups to keep his sight, Beverly, whose daughter has been suffering from eye pain and migraines, and many more. Countless people whose eyesight has changed and need a new prescription so they can continue to drive and go about their daily lives safely. Enough is enough. I'm calling on this government to immediately return to the bargaining table and work out a fair solution so people can receive the eye care they need and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, the member for York South-Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Back in August, I met with Ontario Association of Optometrists and heard their concerns of having adequate funding to perform their valuable services. Eye care is health care, and families in Ontario now no longer have access to OHIP-coveraged eye care, eye exams. Mr. Speaker, I am asking the government to negotiate in good faith with optometrists in providing the funding needed so children and seniors receive their care they need now.
To reply, the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and thank you very much to the member for the question. First, let me say that all OHIP-funded services for both children and seniors are available. This government is continuing to pay for those programs. However, we are disappointed that the Ontario Association of Optometrists has refused to come back to the table, to come back to mediation with us. As I've indicated before, you can't mediate when there's only one party at the table. So we are asking the optometrists to come back to the table for the association to do that. We are interested in working with them, besides the $39 million payment, for past losses that have already been paid. We want to look at future losses. We're back to April 1st. We've indicated we're prepared to pay increases at 8.48%. We also want to understand about their overhead expenses, but we won't learn more about it if they won't come back to the table. So would you please urge the people that you're speaking with to urge the association to come back to the table so we can get working together?
My question back to the Premier. My office has been flooded with letters and calls from families whose children and elders are suffering right now from no access to vision care. This is an unacceptable situation, and it is started back in 2004 when the Liberals delisted routine eye exams from OHIP. This government has continued the legacy of CATS, and optometrists now trail the rest of the country in receiving fair compensation for their professional services. When is this government going to make a serious attempt to put an end to this unnecessary situation and act with urgency that is required, Mr. Speaker?
Minister of Health.
Thank you. Well, certainly one thing that I can agree with the member upon is the fact that the previous contract for the optometrists expired in 2011, and nothing was done by the previous government for many, many, many years. That is something that this government is trying to work on and to restore. That is why we have been asking the optometrists to come back to the table. We are continuing to fund those OHIP services for children and for seniors, but we want the optometrists to come back to the table so we can understand all of their issues. We have already dealt with the funding losses that they've had since 2011 to the present. We've gone retroactively to increase payments by 8.48% from April 1st of this year. We want to establish a working group to truly understand what their overhead costs are. We are more than willing to come back to the table. We urge the Ontario Association of Optometrists to do the same, that we can restore these issues and make sure that everyone has the eye care.
Thank you very much. Member statements. The member for Ottawa-Orléans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for months, optometrists in Ontario have been trying to have discussions with the government about the challenges in the OHIP funding model. And despite months of warnings that they would withdraw their service, the government chose not to engage with optometrists to resolve their concerns. OHIP-covered eye exams ended over a month ago, and the Ontario government continues to be absent from meaningful discussions with the Ontario Association of Optometrists. Eyesight is not a luxury, Mr. Speaker. Imagine you're the mom of two eye tests to perform their best at school and to participate in the extracurricular activities that they've been missing for so long. Their eye tests were cancelled, Mr. Speaker. Les examens de vue couverts par l'assurance de santé ont pris fin il y a plus
eye tests stopped a month ago. The Ontario government is not negotiating with the Optometrists Association of Ontario. Imagine that you are at the head of an elderly house like David. David cannot see with one of his eyes. It's an easily corrected condition with glasses. Unfortunately, David cannot get an appointment with an optometrist. We need a solution now.
Optometrists and work out a deal so that they can once again provide world-class eye care to Ontarians. Thank you.
The next question, the member for Kiiwetinoong.
Good morning, Speaker. Question to the Premier. Vision is key for development for children, as over 80% of children's learning is based on vision. Dr. Sabri, a pediatric ophthalmologist at McMaster Children's Hospital, tells us more than a third of Indigenous children have farsightedness, more than 3 times higher than non-Indigenous children. Research also shows that Indigenous children experience very high levels of astigmatism and uncorrected refractive error. Speaker, right now, parents across Kiiwetinoong can't get their children the eye care they need because this government won't negotiate a fair deal with the optometrists. Will this government fund the optometry services that our kids need and deserve?
Minister of Health.
And thank you very much to the member for the question. You're absolutely right that children across the province require services of optometrists, as do many seniors. And that's why we were extremely disappointed that the optometrists have chosen to withhold publicly funded or OHIP-funded services for children and for seniors. This is something that is very unfortunate because we are not withholding services. The government is not withholding these publicly funded services. It's simply that the optometrists have decided that they are not going to provide them. We are ready, willing and able to return to the mediation table to discuss the issues that optometrists have. There's no question that they were not fairly dealt with by the previous government, but we are ready to remedy those wrongs. We are ready to go back to the table with them, to negotiate a fair deal, to listen to what they have to say, and we're asking for the optometrists to please come back to the table so we can do just that.
Thank you. The supplementary question.
Miigwech to the Minister for the response. Children need your help. We know that eye care is health care. And Kiiwetinoong doctors have shared with me with their concerns about the high incidence of eye disease and extra care needed in the region. People in Kiiwetinoong are among the sickest in Canada. Elders and seniors right across the north need regular eye care exams because of the diseases they have. Because of COVID, and now this, they have been waiting for 2 years now. Why does this government say no when it comes to ensuring everyone can access essential eye and vision care they need?
Again, the Minister of Health.
Well, our government is actually saying yes. We want to come back to the table. We recognize that Indigenous children across Ontario need access to eye care. They're back in school. Many of them may require glasses, for example. We also know that there are seniors that have cataract and other problems, other vision problems where they need to be served. So that's why we're asking the optometrists to please come back to the mediation table. You can't negotiate if there's only one party there. We are ready to go there. We have agreed with the mediators' requirements for considering going back into mediation. We want to do that. We want to address the issues of the past, which we have with the payment of the $39 million. We want to go forward with starting with an 8.48% increase, retroactive to April 1st, and we want to discuss the overhead issues that the optometrists wish to discuss. So we are ready, willing, and able to proceed. We're asking to the optometrists to please come back to the table.
Thank you.